The first signs of trouble came in the form of distress calls from Whittier, Alaska on December 17th, 1995. I wasn't supposed to hear them. Nobody outside of a very specific chain of command was, but working night shifts at the Coast Guard Communications Center in Juneau meant that I intercepted things I shouldn't have. Mayday, Mayday, this is the vessel, the Northern Light. We have multiple injured crew members. Something's wrong with them. They're attacking the others. Request immediate medical evacuation. That was followed by several minutes of shouting and screaming, sounds that I still remember 28 years later, and then silence, just dead air. 2 hours later, we received another distress call from the area. We have multiple violent incidents reported throughout the town, requesting immediate state trooper assistance. Medical personnel is overwhelmed. There are multiple casualties. The man that spoke sounded calm, but I had been working communications long enough to recognize the edge of suppressed panic in his voice. It was the sound of somebody desperately trying to maintain composure while witnessing something that defied comprehension. My supervisor took the call from my station. After a brief conversation, he instructed me to log off and take an early break. "Just a routine fishing accident," he said dismissively. "Nothing to concern yourself with." But his expression and the way that his hand trembled slightly as he disconnected told me that this was anything but routine. When I returned from my break, all logs of the calls from Whittier had been purged. The official records showed no distress calls from that area that night. I knew better than to ask any questions. 3 weeks later, I was transferred to Kodiak without explanation or warning, but by then I had already begun to piece together what had happened that night, what the government so desperately wanted to hide. In 1995, I was 27 years old and had been with the Coast Guard for 5 years at that point. My posting in Juneau was supposed to be temporary, just 6 months before a promised transfer down to San Diego. I had already put in for the transfer, eager to escape the brutal Alaskan winter and the isolation that came with it. I wasn't very well liked at the station. I asked too many questions and had a habit of logging everything meticulously. Reynolds keeps records like he's planning to testify before Congress someday. My supervisor joked during a staff meeting. Everyone laughed. I didn't. I just believed in doing my job thoroughly. After the calls from that night and my sudden transfer to Kodiak, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad had happened. My first week in Kodiak, I tried to access the communication logs from that night, only to find that they had been classified. When I inquired about it, my new supervisor gave me a look that I would never forget. "Reynolds," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'm going to give you some advice. Forget whatever you think you heard, for your own good." That night, I found a handwritten note slipped under my door. It simply read, "Whittier wasn't the first, and it won't be the last. Bar, Northern Lights, 10 p.m. I should have ignored it. I should have burned it or ripped it up and forgotten everything. But that's not who I was. The Northern Lights was a dive bar frequented by fishermen and Coast Guard personnel. At 10 p.m. it was packed with the usual crowd, boisterous and drunk. I took a seat at the bar and ordered a beer. 20 minutes passed. I was beginning to think that I had been played when a man slid onto the stool next to mine. He was in his 50s with a weathered face and hands that bore the calluses of somebody who had spent a lifetime at sea. "Are you Reynolds?" he asked without looking at me. "Who's asking? The name's Jack. I was first mate on the Bering Star. We were docked in Whittier on December 17th. My pulse quickened. What happened there? Jack took a long pull from his beer. "First, I need to know why you care. This isn't the sort of thing you want to know about unless you have a good reason." I told him about the calls, the logs, and my transfer. As I spoke, his expression grew darker. "Ah, they're keeping it quiet, just like they did with Nome in '92 and Barrow back in '84. What are you talking about? He leaned in close. They weren't fishing accidents or whatever they told you. What happened in those places and what happened in Whittier? It's something else entirely. He glanced around nervously and then slid a folded piece of paper across the bar to me. It's my address. Come by tomorrow at noon. What I have to tell you shouldn't be said in public. But Jack never got the chance to tell me anything. The next day, when I turned up, I found his apartment door ajar. Inside, the place had been ransacked. No sign of him. He had vanished, and along with him, any hope that I had of uncovering the truth through official channels. That's when I knew that I would have to dig deeper on my own, no matter the risks. I requested leave for a family emergency, a lie that would eventually cost me my career, and I booked a flight to Anchorage. From there, I rented a car and I made the drive to Whittier. In 1995, the Anton Anderson Memorial Tunnel, the only land access to Whittier, wasn't yet converted for regular vehicle traffic. The only way in was by boat and through the railroad tunnel on a designated shuttle. As I approached the tunnel entrance, I was stopped at a checkpoint that hadn't existed on any maps or documentation. Two men in unmarked black parkas stood guard. They definitely weren't military or state troopers. Their insignias didn't match any agency that I recognized. Whittier's closed for the season due to infrastructure repairs, one of them informed me. No access without authorization. I'm Coast Guard, I said, showing my ID. We receive reports of... Whittier's closed, he repeated, cutting me off. His hand rested casually on his firearm. Turn around and head back to Anchorage, now. I complied for now, but I wasn't going to be deterred. I just needed to find another way into town. Back in Anchorage, I checked into a motel and I began making phone calls. I reached out to my contacts on the Coast Guard, fishing crews known to operate in Prince William Sound, and even local journalists. Most of the calls went unanswered. Those who did pick up either knew nothing or refused to speak on it. On my third day in Anchorage, I was nursing a coffee at a diner when a woman slid into the booth across from me. She was in her early 30s with dark hair pulled back and a severe ponytail, and eyes that darted continuously toward the entrance. "You're asking questions about Whittier," she said. It wasn't a question. I studied her carefully. "Who are you?" "Dr. Baker's. I was part of the CDC team sent to Whittier in December." She pushed an envelope across the table. "Take this. Don't open it here. Why are you giving this to me?" Her eyes met mine, and I saw fear there, but also determination. Because what happened there is happening again, and they're going to keep covering it up unless somebody exposes the truth. Before I could ask more, she stood. "I was never here. If anybody asks, you never met me." "Wait!" I called after her, but she was already heading for the door. "How do I contact you if I need to?" She paused briefly. "You don't, but there's somebody in Seward who can help you understand what you're looking at. Ask for Morgan at the harbour master's office." And with that, she was gone, leaving me with the envelope that I was afraid to open, and more questions than answers. Back in my motel room, I locked the door, drew the curtains, and finally opened the envelope. Inside were photocopies of what appeared to be medical reports, photographs, and a handwritten journal. The journal belonged to somebody named Dr. Thomas Reed, apparently another CDC physician dispatched to Whittier. The first entry was dated December 18th, 1995. "We've arrived at Whittier at 600 hours. The military had already established a perimeter. Initial reports indicate 27 dead, 43 infected with an unknown pathogen. Symptoms include extreme aggression, diminished higher brain function, necrosis of tissue, and an insatiable hunger. Containment is the priority. Understanding can come later. Patient 0 appears to be a crewman from the fishing vessel Northern Light, which returned from Russian waters 3 days ago. The crew reported hauling up something unusual in their nets. Near the Diomede Islands, a sample has been requested from the ship's hold. God help us if this spreads beyond Whittier. I flipped through the photographs, clinical images of patients with blackened extremities and vacant milky eyes. In one, a military officer stood over what appeared to be a pile of burning bodies. The medical reports used terminology that I wasn't familiar with, but certain phrases jumped out. Resembles rabies, but with accelerated progression. Transmission through bodily fluids, primarily saliva. Time from infection to full conversion, 3 to 6 hours depending on wound location. Destroyed only through catastrophic brain trauma. My hands trembled as I set the documents down. This couldn't be real. It sounded like something from a horror movie, not an actual CDC report. And yet, the level of detail, the clinical precision of the language, the official headers on the medical reports, it all pointed to authenticity. Either I was looking at evidence of something terrible, or I was being fed an elaborate hoax. I needed to know which. I packed the documents carefully and I headed to Seward to find Morgan. The drive to Seward took me along the Seward Highway, one of the most scenic routes in Alaska, but I barely noticed the beauty that day. My mind was still stuck on the details of that disturbing report. At the harbourmaster's office in Seward, I asked for Morgan and was directed to a weathered building at the far end of the marina. Morgan turned out to be a woman in her 60s, with silver hair and a permanent tan of somebody who had spent a lifetime on the water. "I don't know you," she said when I entered her office. "Dr. Baker sent me from Anchorage." Morgan's expression shifted subtly. She locked the door behind me and closed the blinds. "Show me what she gave you." I handed over the envelope. Morgan spent nearly an hour examining its contents, her expression growing grimmer with each page that she turned. "This is only part of it," she said finally. "The beginning. So it's real. What happened in Whittier?" Morgan nodded slowly. "Not just there. It started years ago with a Soviet research vessel that disappeared in the Bering Sea in 1982. We didn't know about it then, a classified Soviet military operation. But they were experimenting with biological agents, weapons designed to create chaos behind enemy lines in case of war. Biological weapons that turn people into what? Zombies? The word felt ridiculous coming out of my mouth. Morgan didn't laugh. "That's the popular term, yes, but it's more complicated than that. They're not dead, not technically. The pathogen, it hijacks the limbic system, driving the infected into a state of constant rage and hunger while suppressing higher brain functions. The necrosis is a secondary effect, the body essentially consuming itself for energy, because the infected stop performing basic maintenance like eating or sleeping. And this pathogen, it came from the Soviets. Originally, yes, but what makes it truly dangerous is how it's evolved. The Soviet strain was unstable. It burned itself out quickly. The victims would die off within days. But the strain that made its way into Whittier had mutated. The infected lived longer, spread the disease more efficiently. I thought of the journal entry, the mention of a fishing crew hauling up something unusual near the Diomede Islands. They found the vessel after all those years. Not the vessel, one of the researchers. Morgan's voice was hollow. He was preserved in the ice. When they thought him out to identify him, he wasn't dead, I finished. No, he wasn't. Morgan pulled out a map of Alaska and spread it on her desk. She marked off 3 locations: Nome, Barrow, and Whittier, 1984, 92, and 95. Each time they contained it, quarantined the area, eliminated the infected, burned the bodies, and covered it up. Each time they thought that they'd seen the last of it. She marked a 4th location farther inland, but it's back. A small mining community near Denali started 3 days ago. How do you know all this? Morgan's eyes met mine, filled with a profound sadness. Well, because I was part of the containment team in Barrow. because my son was stationed in Whittier with the National Guard when the outbreak had occurred. Her voice broke slightly. The official report says that he died in a training accident. Now I understood why she was helping me. She wanted the truth to be known as much as I did. "What happened to Dr. Reed?" I asked, referring to the journal author. "Officially, they died in a helicopter crash while being transported back to Anchorage." Morgan's expression said that she didn't believe the official story. "And Dr. Baker's, why is she risking everything to expose this?" "Because she knows what they're planning. The pathogen is evolving faster than they can contain it. The outbreaks are getting larger and spreading further. They're running out of options." Morgan leaned forward. "Have you heard about what they're planning?" I shook my head. "Well, it's just a contingency plan. If they can't contain an outbreak, they'll implement it. Full isolation of the Alaska interior. They'll claim that it's an environmental disaster, maybe a nuclear accident at one of the old Cold War sites. They'll evacuate the coast and seal off everything else." "That's insane," I protested. "They just can't do that to American citizens. They've done it before on a smaller scale, like I said, Whittier, Nome, Barrow. Everybody who saw the infected was either evacuated and sworn to secrecy or—" She didn't need to finish that sentence. I sat back, trying to process everything. "Well, what can I do? I'm only a Coast Guard communications officer. You have access, and you have the training to document everything properly." Morgan reached into her desk and pulled out a small recorder. "Start with the testimony of somebody who was there. Somebody who survived Whittier." The tape recorder contained the testimony of James Kowalski, a maintenance worker for the Alaska Railroad, who had been in Whittier when the outbreak began. His voice was steady but haunted as he recounted the events of that night. It started at the harbor. The northern light had just come in, and a few of the crew seemed sick. Like, really sick. But it was Alaska in December. I mean, everybody had something. Nobody thought much of it until one of them collapsed at the Anchor, the bar that's near the harbor. I was there, having a beer after my shift. This guy, I don't even know his name, just fell over and started convulsing. Foam coming out of his mouth, eyes rolling back. Somebody called for a doctor and they carried him to the back room. About 20 minutes later, we heard screaming. 3 people ran out of that back room covered in blood. One of them was missing a chunk of his cheek. Behind them came the sick guy, but he wasn't convulsing anymore. He seemed different. His movements were jerky, almost mechanical, and his eyes were all clouded over. And he was making this sound, this awful moaning. He grabbed the bartender, Frank was his name, and just bit into his neck, tore out his throat right there in front of everyone. It was chaos after that, people running, screaming, fighting for their lives. I made it outside just as the police had arrived. But by then, the people who had been bitten in the bar were starting to change too. It spread through town like wildfire. I holed up in the railroad maintenance shed with a few others. We could hear the screams echoing throughout the town all night. By morning, military helicopters were arriving, men in hazmat suits. They started going building to building. We thought that they were going to rescue us. Yeah, we were wrong. They were containing the outbreak. Anyone showing symptoms was shot on sight. The rest of us were rounded up and separated into groups. Those with injuries, and I mean even small cuts or scrapes, were taken away for medical evaluation. Big surprise, they never came back. I was one of the lucky ones. No injuries, no contact with the infected. They loaded my group onto a helicopter, flew us to an airfield outside Anchorage, a military facility. We were held there for 2 weeks, debriefed daily, told the same thing over and over. It was a chemical spill from a Russian cargo ship. Mass hysteria had caused people to attack each other. What we thought, what we saw, wasn't real. After 2 weeks, they released us, made us sign NDAs, threatened prosecution under national security laws if we ever spoke about what had happened. Most people just wanted to forget anyway. But I know what I saw. Those people in Whittier, my friends, my neighbours, they turned into something else, something not human anymore. And the government is covering it up. God knows why. Maybe they're afraid of panic. Maybe they're afraid people will ask questions about why it happened in the first place. All I know is that I'm telling you this because people need to know the truth. People need to be prepared, because I don't think this is over. The recording ended there. I rewound it and listened again, carefully transcribing every word. When I finished, I sat in silence for a while, trying to reconcile Kowalski's account with the medical reports and Reed's journal. "Where is Kowalski now?" I asked Morgan. She shook her head. "Died in a house fire 3 months after giving that testimony. Official cause was a faulty space heater." "Convenient," I muttered. "Oh, there's more. The CDC reports mention a sample from these ships' hold. Something that they found in their nets. Do we know what it was?" "Not exactly, but I have a contact at the University of Alaska Fairbanks who might. A marine biologist who consulted on the Nome incident in '92. He's expecting you." She wrote an address on a slip of paper. "Dr. Fallon. He'll tell you what you need to know about the origin." As I left Morgan's office, I could feel eyes on me. A black SUV was parked across the marina. 2 men in dark suits watching the harbour master's building. I ducked into a crowd of tourists and then slipped down an alley and out a service entrance. They were already onto me. I needed to move quickly. The drive to Fairbanks was long and gave me too much time to think about what I had learned, about what it meant, about whether I was being paranoid or justifiably cautious. I took detours and back roads, avoiding main highways where I might be spotted. I ditched my rental car, and I bought a used pickup truck for cash from a local who didn't ask any questions. I paid extra for him to handle the paperwork later. Dr. Fallon's home was located on the outskirts of Fairbanks, a modest cabin surrounded by spruce trees. When I arrived, the place was dark. I approached cautiously, knocking on the door. There was no answer. I tried the handle. It turned easily and unlocked. Inside, the cabin was in disarray. Books and papers scattered across the floor, furniture overturned, signs of a struggle or perhaps a hasty surge. On the kitchen table lay a single envelope with my name written out on it. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. "If you're reading this, they got to me first. Everything I know was on this drive. The truth is worse than you can imagine. They didn't just find it. They were looking for it. Be careful who you trust. No one is who they seem. Fallon." A sudden noise outside sent me diving for cover. Headlights swept across the cabin windows as a vehicle pulled up. I pocketed the drive and slipped out the back door, making my way into the woods just as I heard car doors slamming shut. From my hiding place among the trees, I watched as 4 men in tactical gear entered the cabin. They moved with military precision and weapons drawn. Not local police, not FBI, something else. I remained hidden until they had departed, taking with them boxes of Fallon's research. Once they were gone, I returned to my truck and drove to the nearest motel with internet access. The drive contained hundreds of files, research papers, correspondence, video files. I started with a document titled Nome Incident 1992. Fallon had been called in to examine a sample recovered from Nome following the containment operation there. His report described something that defied conventional classification. A prehistoric microorganism preserved in the permafrost for potentially millions of years. The organism displays characteristics of both bacteria and viruses, but belongs to neither category. It appears capable of remaining dormant for extended periods in temperatures below freezing and then reactivating when exposed to heat. Once active, it aggressively attacks neural tissue, specifically targeting regions of the brain associated with higher reasoning while leaving primitive functions intact. More alarming is its apparent ability to modify host DNA to facilitate transmission. Infected hosts develop heightened aggression and an oral fixation that, combined with the compound the organism produces, drives them to bite the most efficient means of spreading the pathogen. This is not a natural evolution. The precision of its effects suggests deliberate engineering. Yet carbon dating places this sample at approximately 25,000 years old, far earlier than human genetic engineering capabilities. The question then becomes, if not human engineering, then what? I moved on to the video files. Most were corrupted, but one played. It showed Fallon in his laboratory speaking directly to the camera. He looked exhausted, his eyes ringed with dark circles. I've confirmed it now. The Soviet research vessel wasn't exploring for natural resources as their cover story claimed. They were following coordinates found and classified at German documents captured at the end of World War II. The Germans had an expedition to the Edimid Islands in 1938, looking for something specific. Both the Soviets and the Germans were working from that same ancient text, a pre-Inuit manuscript that described sleepers in the ice who would one day rise and feast upon the living. They thought that it was metaphorical. It wasn't. What they found was a pathogen unlike anything in modern science. The Soviets tried to weaponize it, but it proved uncontrollable. Their vessel was intentionally scuttled when the infection broke containment on board. But here's the thing. The pathogen they found wasn't the only sample. The permafrost in northern Alaska contains more deposits. As global warming accelerates and the permafrost melts, we're going to see more outbreaks. Whittier won't be the last. The government knows this. What they're doing isn't just a containment protocol. It's a research initiative. They're looking for all remaining deposits, trying to secure them. But I've seen classified reports suggesting that they're still trying to weaponize this thing, despite the disasters that have happened. They're playing with fire and we're all going to get burned. The video cut off abruptly. I sat back, my mind reeling. This went beyond a simple cover-up. If Fallon was right, the government wasn't just hiding outbreaks. They were actively studying the pathogen, perhaps even causing new infections in their quest to understand and control it. I needed more evidence. Hard proof that would stand up to the scrutiny. I had to gain access to Whittier itself. Getting back inside would be a challenge. The checkpoint at the tunnel entrance would still be guarded, and I was likely on some watch list by now. But there was another way in, the same way the original pathogen had arrived. By sea. In Seward, I used cash to charter a small fishing boat. The captain, an older man named Peter, asked no questions when I paid triple his usual rate. I told him that I was a wildlife photographer looking to capture images of Whittier from the water. He seemed skeptical but agreed to take me. We set out the following morning, navigating through Prince William Sound. As we approached Whittier, I could see that the small port town appeared normal from a distance. Lights were on in buildings. A coast guard, a cutter, was docked at the main pier. "That's strange," Peter commented. "Heard Whittier was closed for repairs. Some kind of infrastructure problem." "Let's get closer," I urged, "just for a few photos." Peter complied, bringing the boat within a half-mile of the harbour. Through my binoculars, I could see that the town was anything but normal. The people moving about wore military uniforms or hazmat suits. Large tents had been erected in what used to be the town square. Perimeter fencing surrounded the entire community. "This doesn't look like infrastructure repairs," Peter said, now openly suspicious. "No," I agreed, "it doesn't." I took dozens of photographs, documenting everything that I could see. The military presence, the containment protocols, the fact that none of the people visible appeared to be civilians or original residents. As we watched, a large truck pulled up to one of the tents. Men in hazmat suits unloaded what looked like metal canisters. "We should go," Peter said nervously now. But before we could turn around, that Coast Guard patrol boat appeared, cutting across our path. "Civilian vessel, this is the Coast Guard. You have entered a restricted zone. Prepare to be boarded." Peter shot me an accusatory look. "What have you gotten me into?" "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "Let me handle this." The Coast Guard boarding party consisted of 4 men, none wearing standard Coast Guard uniforms. They carried automatic weapons and moved with the practiced efficiency of special forces. "Identification," the leader demanded. I handed over a fake ID that I had purchased in Anchorage. Peter reluctantly showed his captain's license. "What's your business here?" the leader asked. "Wildlife photography," I said, indicating my camera. "Didn't realize this area was restricted." The leader studied my ID closely and then spoke into his radio. After a moment, he turned back to us. "Your vessel will be escorted back to Seward. You're both required to attend a security briefing upon arrival." They placed 2 men on our boat to ensure that we complied. As we pulled away from Whittier, I carefully removed the memory card from my camera and slipped it into a waterproof case, which I concealed in my boot. Back in Seward, we were taken to a nondescript government building. Peter was led to one room while I was taken to another. Inside waited a man in a dark suit who introduced himself only as Smith. "Yeah, generic, right?" "Mr. Reynolds," he said. "Or should I say, Officer Reynolds. You're a long way from your post in Kodiak." I said nothing. "You've been asking a lot of questions about Whittier, speaking to people that you shouldn't be speaking to, accessing information you shouldn't be accessing." Still, I remained silent. Let me be clear. What happened in Whittier was a chemical spill from a Russian cargo vessel. The town is temporarily closed for environmental remediation. That's the story, and that's what you'll tell anybody who asks. What if I don't? I finally spoke. Smith smiled thinly. "You've had an exemplary Coast Guard career up to this point. It would be a shame to see that end with a dishonorable discharge, or worse, federal charges for interfering with a national security operation." He slid a document across the table. "Sign this NDA and return to your post, and we can pretend that this little adventure never happened." I looked down at the document and then back at Smith. "So what about the people of Whittier, the ones who didn't make it out? What do you tell their families?" "That's been handled," Smith said coldly. "And the next outbreak? Will that be handled too?" His expression darkened. "Just sign the document, Reynolds." "I know about what you're doing," I said. "I know about the Soviet research vessel and the German expedition before that. I know this isn't the first outbreak, and it won't be the last." For the first time, Smith looked actually surprised. "Who have you been talking to?" "Enough people to know the truth. And I've documented everything. And if anything happens to me, that documentation will go public." Of course, it was a bluff. I hadn't had time to secure my evidence or arrange for its release, but Smith didn't know that. He leaned back, studying me. "What do you even want?" "The truth. What really happened in Whittier? What's happening right now?" He was silent for a long moment. And then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a cigarette, lighting it despite the no smoking sign on the wall. "The truth," he said, exhaling a plume of smoke. "It's more complicated than you know, and more dangerous." Smith took me into another room, one without windows or surveillance cameras, and he ordered the guards to wait outside. "What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. If you repeat it, I'll deny everything and you'll disappear. Do you understand?" I nodded. In 1938, a German expedition to the Diomede Islands discovered something preserved in the ice. The remains of a civilization predating all known human cultures. Among their artifacts was a sealed container holding what appeared to be a biological sample. The sleepers in the ice. I sat, recalling Fallon's video. Smith raised an eyebrow, but continued. The Germans attempted to study it but quickly realized its potential as a weapon. When the war turned against them, they hid their research. Soviet forces captured some of it in 1945. In 1982, they mounted an expedition to recover the original sample. And it infected their research vessel, I added. Yes, everybody aboard was lost. The Soviets scuttled the ship, but not before one researcher made it to shore near Nome. He carried the infection with him, but the extreme cold had slowed its progression. He remained in a semi-dormant state until 1984, when a hunting party had found him. Barrow, 1984, I said. The first outbreak. Smith nodded. We contained it, at great cost, but samples were taken for study. The military saw potential applications. As a weapon, I said, disgust evident in my voice. As a deterrent, Smith corrected. Something so frightening that no nation would risk a conflict if they knew that we possessed it, but you couldn't control it. No. The Nome incident in '92 resulted from a containment breach at a research facility. We shut it down and sanitized the area. And Whittier, what about that? Was it another containment breach? Smith hesitated. Not exactly. The fishing vessel Northern Light pulled up something in their nets. The remains of a Soviet researcher from the 1982 expedition preserved in the ice for 13 years. When they thawed him out, he wasn't dead. I finished, remembering Morgan's words. No, and the strain had mutated during its time in the ice, more aggressive, faster acting. By the time that we were alerted, half the town was infected, so you quarantined it and killed everyone infected, got rid of the bodies. Smith didn't deny it. We had no choice. The alternative was potentially losing all of Alaska and maybe beyond. And what about now? The mining community near Denali. Smith's eyes narrowed. Who told you about that? Does it matter? Is it happening again? After a long pause, Smith nodded. But it's different this time. The pathogen, it's mutated once again. The infected are smarter. They can use tools, and some even retain the ability to speak. And they're not attacking indiscriminately. They're organized. A chill ran down my spine. Organized? Yeah, they're working together, Smith said, luring his voice even though we were alone. The first generation of infected were mindless, driven only by hunger and rage. These new ones, though, they coordinate their attacks. They set traps. They target infrastructure first, communications, power, transportation, to isolate their victims. How is that even possible? The medical report said that the pathogen destroys higher brain functions. Well, that was the original strain. This one's different. It's evolving. Smith ran a hand through his hair, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. The original theory is that the pathogen is developing a kind of hive mind. The infected aren't individuals anymore. They're nodes in a network, sharing information, working toward a common goal. Which is what? Spreading, growing. We believe the pathogen itself is intelligent, using human hosts as vessels to expand its reach. That sounds like science fiction, I said, although after everything I've seen and heard, I wasn't so sure anymore. 2 weeks ago, I would have agreed with you, and then we lost contact with a research team studying ice core samples near Denali. The rescue party found them changed, but not mindless. They had set up an ambush. 7 highly trained operatives, dead in minutes. Smith pulled out a tablet and showed me some helmet camera footage. The video showed a first-person view of a military team entering what looked like a research station. The place was dark and the equipment overturned. As they moved deeper into the facility, shapes lunged from the shadows. People with greyish skin and clouded eyes, moving with a natural speed and coordination. What happened next was chaos, screaming, gunfire, blood. But what chilled me the most was the sound of the infected. Not mindless moans, but deliberate commands. Lights, one guttural voice ordered. The facility plunged into darkness. Flanking, another voice rasped. More screaming and then silence. The camera continued to record, now lying on the floor. A face moved into frame, once human, but now something else. Milky eyes stared directly into the camera. We learn, it said. A voice like gravel. We adapt. We spread. And then the screen went dark. Smith took back the tablet. That was 3 days ago. We've lost contact with 3 more communities within 50 miles of the research station. The contingency plan has been activated. Full isolation of the interior. I murmured to myself. Smith looked surprised again. You are well informed. Yeah, we're establishing a quarantine line. Everybody outside the line gets evacuated. Everybody inside, well... He let the implication hang. You're really going to abandon all the people there? We're going to contain a threat to society, Smith countered. The alternative is watching this spread across the continent, and then across the world. There has to be another way. A cure. Something that we can give people. We've been trying to develop one since 1984. Nothing works. The pathogen, it adapts too quickly. So what happens now? You just cover it up again. Tell everybody that it's some environmental disaster. Smith nodded. A nuclear waste leak from an old Cold War site. We've already begun getting the story into the media, and nobody questions it. Nobody speaks out. Some try to. They're discredited. Or they have accidents. His eyes met mine. The threat clear. Like Kowalski, like Dr. Reed. Smith said nothing. Why are you telling me all of this? Why not just make me disappear like the others? Well, because we need people like you, Reynolds. People who ask questions, who look for the truth. But we need you asking the right questions and looking in the right places. You want to recruit me. To help with the cover-up. To help save lives, Smith corrected. The public can't know what's really happening. There would be panic, chaos. Millions would die in the exodus from Alaska alone. Or they could prepare or protect themselves. Against this, Smith gestured to the tablet. There is no protection, only containment. I sat back, processing everything. A part of me wanted to refuse to expose the whole thing. But another part of me knew that Smith was right about one thing. Panic would cost lives. I need to think, I said finally. Smith nodded. You have until tomorrow morning. But remember, if you choose to go public, no one will believe you, and you won't live long enough to convince them. He left me alone in the room, the door unlocked. It was a test, I realized, to see if I would run. I didn't. Instead, I carefully removed the memory card from my boot and reviewed the photos that I had taken of Whittier. They confirmed everything that Smith had already told me. But they also showed something that Smith hadn't mentioned. There were civilians that had survived. They were being loaded onto military trucks. All of them were in restraints. They weren't just containing the outbreak. They were taking prisoners. I spent the night in a motel in Seward, looking over my options. By morning, I still hadn't decided what to do. Smith had arranged to meet at a cafe near the harbour. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, an envelope in front of him. So, if you made your choice, he asked as I sat down. I saw the photos. The civilians being taken away in restraints. Test subjects. We need to understand this pathogen if we're going to fight it. But those are just regular people. Those are infected individuals who haven't turned yet. The restraints are for their protection as well as ours. You're experimenting on them. Smith didn't deny it. We're trying to save millions of lives. Sometimes that requires difficult choices, like covering up outbreaks and silencing witnesses. Yes, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. I studied him carefully. What's in the envelope? Your new identity. A position with a special task force within the CDC. Excellent pay, full benefits, and the chance to help find a real solution to this threat. If I agree to keep quiet, if you agree to work within the system rather than against it. I thought about everything that I had learned. About the new strain near Denali that was even now spreading through the Alaskan interior. I want to talk to Dr. Bakers, I said, and I want access to all the research, all the data on previous outbreaks. Done. Smith agreed readily. And the survivors from Whittier. I want to oversee their treatment. No unnecessary testing, no experiments without consent. Smith hesitated at that and then nodded. I can arrange it. I'll need it in writing. Signed by whoever's in charge of this operation. You'll have it by the end of the day. Smith pushed the envelope toward me. Welcome to the team, Dr. Reynolds. I opened the envelope. Inside was a CDC identification card with my photo, but a different name. There was also a brief dossier outlining my fictional background as an epidemiologist specializing in Arctic pathogens. It's a good cover, close enough to your actual skills that you can play the part convincingly. What if I change my mind later on? Decide to go public? His smile didn't reach his eyes. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. I took the ID card feeling as though I had made a deal with the devil, but I also felt something else. Hope that from the inside I might actually be able to make a difference, to find a solution that didn't involve abandoning American citizens or covering up the truth. When do I start? Immediately. There's a helicopter waiting at the airfield. It will take you to our containment facility near Denali. Smith stood. Dr. Bakers will meet you there. As we left the cafe, I noticed Peter, the boat captain who had taken me to Whittier, watching from across the street. His expression was a mixture of confusion and suspicion. I turned away, unable to meet his eyes. There will be people that you can't explain this to, Smith said, noticing the exchange. Former colleagues, friends, family. That's all part of the sacrifice. I understand, I said, though the weight of that sacrifice was only beginning to register. The helicopter ride to the containment facility took just under 2 hours. Below us, the Alaskan wilderness stretched endlessly, beautiful and indifferent to the human drama unfolding within it, and the facility turned out to be a converted military base, surrounded by a double perimeter of razor-wire fencing. Armed guards patrolled the grounds, and I could see snipers positioned on watchtowers. Dr. Bakers met me as I disembarked, her expression guarded. You agreed to join, she said. It wasn't a question. I thought you wanted me to expose the truth, I replied quietly. I wanted you to know the truth. What you did with that knowledge was always your choice. And you? Why are you here? Dr. Bakers looked toward the facility's main building. Wow, because this is where I can do the most good, where I might find a way to stop this thing. Smith said the pathogen is evolving, developing a hive mind. Bakers nodded grimly. Come with me. There's something that you need to see. She led me to a secure wing of the facility. After passing through multiple checkpoints and decontamination procedures, we entered into an observation room. Through a large window, I could see a containment chamber where a single figure sat shackled to a chair. The figure had once been a man, perhaps in his 40s, but now his skin was grey, threaded with black veins. His eyes were clotted over, but they tracked our movement with unsettling precision. This is patient 23. He was a part of the research team near Denali. Infected 7 days ago. He hasn't fully turned. I asked, noting that while the man's appearance was altered, he wasn't displaying the extreme aggression or hunger described in the reports. He's turned, but not like the others. He's something new. As if on cue, patient 23 spoke. His voice was raspy but clear. New visitors, new perspectives. Useful. I stepped back involuntarily. He's aware. How more than aware? He's been helping us understand the pathogen voluntarily. Why would he do that? Ask him yourself. I approached the intercom. Patient 23, can you hear me? The infected man smiled, revealing blackened gums. I hear you, Dr. Reynolds, former Coast Guard, now newest member of the team. I looked at Baker's and alarm. How does he know that? We don't know, she admitted. He knows things that he shouldn't possibly know. Names, dates, details about other containment sites. I turned back to the intercom. Why are you helping us? Not helping you, he replied. Helping us. All of us. The old way is inefficient. Mindless aggression, reckless spread. It attracts attention. It creates resistance. And the new way? I asked, dreading the answer. Oh, selective, careful patient. His milky eyes seemed to look right through me. When we learn from each host, adapt and improve, the next generation will be better. Next generation of what? Patient 23 tilted his head, the movement unnaturally fluid. Of life. Your kind had its time, now it's our turn. Baker's pulled me away from the intercom. That's enough for today. He gets excited with new people. Once we were safely outside the containment area, I rounded on her. What was that? It talked about our kind like it's not human anymore. It's not. It's not, Baker said simply. The pathogen doesn't just hijack the body, it rewrites DNA, creates something new. Patient 23 is a hybrid. It's part human, part something else. And you're keeping him alive and talking to him. We need to understand what we're fighting, and he's not the only one. Baker's led me to her office where wall-mounted screens displayed data from multiple containment cells. We have 17 subjects in various stages of transformation, all from the Denali outbreak. The civilians I saw being taken from Whittier. It's a different situation, Baker's cut in. The Whittier strain was aggressive and mindless. Most of those infected had to be terminated for containment purposes. A few in early stages were transported for study, but they fully turned within hours. And the Denali strain, it's a slower progression, more control. The infected don't immediately attack, they integrate, hide symptoms, spread deliberately. Baker's brought out a map showing red dots spreading outward from Denali. By the time that we identified the pattern, it had already reached these communities. The dots covered an alarming portion of the Alaskan interior, the quarantine line. Baker's nodded. We're evacuating everyone we can from coastal areas. The interior. She didn't finish the sentence. How long until the quarantine is complete? 72 hours, and after that, nothing crosses the line. Not by land, not by air, not by sea. And what if the infection reaches the quarantine line? Her expression was grim. There are other plans. Like what? She hesitated and then spoke quietly. Cleansing protocols. Nuclear. Among other options, nothing's off the table. I sank into a chair, the enormity of the situation crushing down on me. This can't be happening. While it is, it has been since 1984. The question is whether this time we can find a permanent solution instead of just another temporary containment. Patient 23, can he help? If he's cooperating, maybe. Or he could be manipulating us, leading us away from effective countermeasures. Baker's rubbed her eyes tiredly. That's the problem with this new strain. We can't trust anything they say. They're too intelligent, but not invulnerable, I pointed out. The pathogen, It still has weaknesses. It couldn't survive in the Soviet researcher until he thawed out. Bakers looked up sharply. Extreme cold? Yes, that remains effective against all strains that we've encountered. It doesn't kill the pathogen, but it renders it dormant. Could we use that? Induce hypothermia in infected individuals? Possible for individual cases, but not practical for a large-scale containment. Although, what? The original Soviet research. They were working on a delivery system for the pathogen, an aerosol that could spread it rapidly through a population. Bakers moved to her computer, typing rapidly. We could potentially adapt that approach. Create an aerosol that instead delivers an agent to induce rapid localized hypothermia. Freeze them from the inside out, I said, understanding. Exactly. It wouldn't kill the pathogen, but it would render the infected immobile and harmless. Give us time to develop a more permanent solution. Again, for the first time since I had heard those distress calls from Whittier, I felt a glimmer of hope. How quickly could we develop something like that? What the resources here may be a week, but... Baker stopped suddenly, looking at one of the monitors. That's odd. What is it? Patient 23's vital signs, they're fluctuating wildly. She moved to another screen, bringing up the live feed from his containment cell. Patient 23 was convulsing, foam bubbling from his mouth, and then abruptly he went still. The vital sign monitors flatlined. He's dead, I said. Baker frowned. That shouldn't be possible. The pathogen preserves the host at all costs. Before she could say any more, an alarm blared through the facility. Red warning lights began to flash. Containment breach in Sector 7. All personnel evacuate immediately. Sector 7. That's where the other test subjects are being held. Could they have escaped? It's impossible, unless... Patient 23, he wasn't convulsing. He was communicating. With the other infected. But how? I don't know. Some kind of biochemical signaling. But if I'm right, this was coordinated. Baker's was already moving toward the door. We need to get to the command center now! As we ran through the corridors, the facility descended into chaos. Armed guards rushed past us, heading toward Sector 7. Scientists and support staff evacuated in the opposite direction. Through windows overlooking the courtyard, I could see military helicopters taking off, not coming in to reinforce, but leaving. They're abandoning the facility, I realized aloud. Standard protocol for a major containment breach, Bakers explained as we ran. If the infected can't be contained, the site is considered a loss. All non-essential personnel evacuate, and then cleansing protocols. I finished. We reached the command center to find it nearly deserted. Only a handful of senior personnel remained, coordinating the evacuation. Smith was among them, barking orders into a radio. Status report, he demanded when he saw us. Patient 23 is dead, but I believe he somehow signaled the other test subjects before he died. Coordinated action. Smith cursed. Sector 7 is completely overrun. The infected have breached 3 security checkpoints already, and they're heading for the East Wing. The armory, Bakers realized. And the communications center, I added. Just like at Denali, they're targeting infrastructure first. Smith made a quick decision. Bakers, Reynolds, come with me. But where? I asked. To make sure what happened here stays here. Smith led us to a secure elevator that required both retinal and fingerprint verification to activate. As the elevator descended, Bakers touched my arm. Reynolds, there's something that you need to know about the Soviet research vessel, about why the government has been so determined to keep this a secret. What is it? Before she could answer, the elevator had reached its destination, a bunker deep beneath the facility. Inside was a small room dominated by a single computer terminal. Smith moved to the terminal and began entering commands. Dr. Bakers, I need your authorization code. She hesitated and then stepped forward and entered a long sequence of numbers. What is this? I asked, looking between them. Insurance, Smith said grimly, against worst-case scenarios. The computer screen displayed a countdown, 15 minutes and ticking downward. You're destroying the facility, I realized, with everybody still in it, I added, horrified. Most essential personnel have already evacuated. The infected have blocked the remaining evacuation routes. We have no choice. There has to be another way, I insisted. Baker's was working on a delivery system for cold therapy. If we had more time... We don't have more time, Smith cut me off. The quarantine line is still being established. If even one infected individual escapes this facility, the entire operation is compromised, so we just die here with them. Smith moved to a wall panel and pressed his palm against it. The panel slid open, revealing a small elevator. This will take us to a secure bunker 3 miles from here. We have 15 minutes to reach it before detonation. The three of us entered the elevator. As it began to ascend, I turned to Baker's. You were going to tell me something. She glanced at Smith, who nodded slightly. The Soviets didn't find the pathogen by accident. They were following up on American research from the 50s. What? Officially, it was a military installation beneath the Greenland ice sheet. Unofficially, it was where we first studied samples of the pathogen recovered from the German expedition. We created this thing? I asked, stunned. Not created, Baker's corrected. Weaponized, enhanced. The original pathogen was dangerous but limited. It couldn't survive in temperatures above freezing, so we modified it. Why? The Cold War. We needed an edge over the Soviets. Something that would make conventional warfare obsolete. But it got out of control. Baker's nodded. The first major breach was in '62. We managed to contain it, but not before Soviet intelligence learned of the project. So they mounted their own expedition in 1982 to recover samples from the original source. And now we're paying for that mistake, over and over again. The elevator reached its destination. A tunnel carved through bedrock. A military Humvee waited at the end. We have 12 minutes, Smith said, checking his watch. As we drove through the tunnel, I processed what I had learned. The government hadn't just been covering up natural outbreaks of an ancient pathogen. They had been covering up their own role in enhancing and weaponizing it. The public deserves to know the truth, I said finally. And they will, Baker's replied, surprising me. Eventually. What do you mean? This isn't just about containment anymore. It's about preparation. The pathogen is in the environment now, in the melting permafrost, in the Arctic waters. We can't keep it contained forever. Sooner or later, there will be an outbreak that we can't stop. So what are we going to do? Controlled disclosure, Smith said. Over the next 5 years, research papers will begin appearing about theoretical pathogens preserved in the Arctic ice. News stories about the dangers of climate change releasing ancient microorganisms, preparing the public without causing panic. And in the meantime, we continue developing other countermeasures. Your idea about cold therapy has merit. We'll pursue it at the backup facility. The Humvee emerged from the tunnel into the Alaskan wilderness. In the distance, I could see the containment facility now surrounded by helicopters establishing a perimeter. We reached the bunker with 4 minutes to spare. As we descended into its depths, Baker's continued explaining the long-term strategy. The truth will come out, Reynolds, but in a controlled way that allows people to process it without society collapsing and with solutions ready to implement. We reached the command center of the bunker just as the countdown hit 0. On the monitors, we watched as a series of explosions ripped through the containment facility, reducing it to rubble. That won't kill the pathogen, just the host. And any evidence of what happened there, I added. I stared at the explosion, the containment facility being ripped to shreds, and I feared what the future might hold for our world. 30 years had passed since the Whittier incident. The team that I was a part of evolved from a containment protocol into a global initiative. As Bakers had predicted, the truth had emerged gradually. Scientific papers about ancient pathogens in the permafrost, news stories about small and isolated outbreaks of novel diseases in the Arctic Circle, preparation without panic. The cold therapy approach proved effective against the original strains, but less so against newer mutations. Still, it bought us time to develop more targeted treatments. We can now identify infected individuals before they turn and administer countermeasures that suppress the pathogen indefinitely. But we haven't cured it. And as climate change accelerates, more ancient deposits are being exposed each year. So the battle continues.